Elias Boone had spent the last 4 years speaking more to the wind than to people. His ranch sat far beyond the nearest town, tucked between rolling prairie and a narrow creek that twisted through the land like a silver ribbon. Most folks considered the place too isolated to be worth the trouble, but that was exactly why Elias stayed there. Solitude was easier than grief. At 46 years old, he carried loss the way old trees carried scars from lightning strikes. His wife, Clara, had died during a harsh winter fever, and after her passing, the ranch became quieter with each passing season. The laughter that once filled the cabin had faded. The songs she hummed while baking bread were gone. Even the rocking chair beside the fireplace remained untouched, exactly where she had left it. Every evening followed the same routine. Feed the horses. Check the fences. Split firewood. Eat alone. Sleep. Then repeat. The people in town had long since stopped trying to draw him into conversations. Elias wasn't unfriendly. He simply lived behind walls no one could see. On a bitter winter evening, the sky darkened early beneath thick gray clouds. Snow drifted across the prairie in restless waves, and the wind carried a warning of a storm still gathering strength. Elias had just finished securing the barn doors when he heard something unusual. Not a coyote. Not a horse. A cry. Faint. Barely audible beneath the wind. He froze. For several seconds, he listened. There it was again. A weak voice. Human. Grabbing a lantern, he followed the sound toward a cluster of cedar trees near the creek. The snow reached almost to his knees. Visibility worsened with every step. More than once, he nearly turned back, convinced he had imagined the sound entirely. Then the lantern light revealed a shape beneath the snow-covered branches. Someone was there. A young woman. She lay motionless against the trunk of a cedar tree, half covered by drifting snow. Elias rushed forward. She couldn't have been older than 20. Her clothing was torn. One sleeve was stained dark with blood. Her face was pale from cold and exhaustion. For a moment, he simply stared. The sensible choice would have been to leave. Strangers brought problems, and problems had a way of finding lonely ranchers. Yet something stopped him. Perhaps it was the memory of Clara. Perhaps it was simple decency. Whatever the reason, Elias crouched beside her and checked for a pulse. Weak, but alive. Without hesitation, he lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. The storm seemed determined to fight him every step back to the cabin, but he eventually forced the door open and carried her inside. Warmth from the fireplace slowly filled the room. He placed her on a blanket near the hearth and examined the injury on her arm. The wound looked recent. A deep cut, but not life-threatening. Years ago, during his time working as a frontier medic, Elias had treated far worse injuries. Carefully, he cleaned the wound and wrapped it with fresh bandages. The entire time, the young woman remained unconscious. Only once did she stir, whispering words in a language he didn't understand. Her accent and appearance told him enough. Comanche. He hadn't seen a member of the tribe in years. Most had moved farther south after growing tensions with settlers and soldiers. What was one doing alone in the middle of a winter storm? The question lingered in his mind long after the treatment was finished. Hours passed. Outside, snow battered the cabin walls. Inside, only the crackling fire broke the silence. Sometime after midnight, the young woman finally opened her eyes. Fear appeared instantly. She sat upright so suddenly that she nearly lost her balance. Her gaze darted around the room. The fireplace. The table. The door. Then Elias. He remained seated across the room, hands visible, making no sudden movements. "You're safe," he said calmly. The woman didn't answer. She studied him carefully. Suspicious. Exhausted. Ready to flee if necessary. Elias understood. Trust was not something given freely on the frontier, especially not between strangers. He pointed toward a plate sitting on the table. "There's food if you want it." For several moments, she remained motionless. Then hunger won. Slowly, she crossed the room and picked up a piece of cornbread. She ate cautiously while never taking her eyes off him. Elias returned his attention to the fire. No questions. No demands. No expectations. The silence seemed to ease some of her tension. Eventually, she spoke. Only 2 words. Thank you. Her voice was soft but steady. Elias nodded. Get some rest. She hesitated before settling near the hearth once again. The storm continued through the night. By morning, nearly a foot of fresh snow covered the prairie. When Elias stepped outside to feed the horses, the world seemed unusually still. Too still. Years of ranching had taught him to trust instincts. And right now, every instinct told him something was wrong. He scanned the snow-covered ground. Then his stomach tightened. Fresh tracks. Horse tracks. Not 1 or 2. Dozens. They circled the ranch like a tightening rope. Elias slowly lifted his gaze toward the distant ridge. Dark figures stood against the morning sky. Mounted riders. Many of them. Watching. Waiting. And as the first rays of sunlight touched the frozen prairie, Elias realized one thing. The young woman inside his cabin wasn't simply running from danger. Danger had followed her here. Danger had followed her here. Elias remained motionless near the barn, his eyes fixed on the ridge where the riders stood. There were dozens of them. 60. Maybe 70. The distance made it hard to tell. What he could tell was that every rider sat perfectly still, watching the ranch below. No one moved. No one called out. The silence felt heavier than any threat. A cold wind swept across the prairie. Elias slowly turned and walked back toward the cabin. Inside, the young woman was standing beside the fireplace. The color had begun returning to her face, but the moment she saw his expression, she knew something had changed. They found me, she said quietly. It was the first complete sentence she had spoken. Elias nodded. You expected them. She looked toward the window. Yes. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Elias pulled a chair away from the table and sat down. You got a name? The young woman hesitated. Ayanna. It suited her somehow. Strong and calm at the same time. Elias, he replied. She gave a small nod. Outside, the riders remained on the ridge. Watching. Waiting. Neither side seemed eager to make the first move. What happened? Elias finally asked. Ayanna lowered her eyes. The fire crackled between them. I left my people. You ran away? No. The answer came quickly. Firmly. She looked back up. I chose my own path. Elias noticed the difference immediately. This wasn't a frightened girl fleeing punishment. This was someone who had made a decision and refused to surrender it. My father is a chief, she continued. He arranged a future for me. A future I did not want. Elias leaned back slightly. And he sent 70 warriors after you? A faint smile touched her face for the first time. He sent them because he loves me. That wasn't the answer Elias expected. Before he could ask more, a distant horn echoed across the prairie. Both of them looked toward the window. The riders had begun moving. Slowly. Deliberately. Like a tide rolling toward shore. Within minutes, they surrounded the ranch. No weapons were raised. No war cries echoed through the air. Still, the sight was intimidating. Mounted warriors formed a wide circle around the property, their horses shifting restlessly in the snow. At their center rode a tall man wrapped in a dark buffalo hide cloak. His posture alone commanded attention. Even before he dismounted, Elias knew who he was. Ayanna's father. The chief. The man rode forward until only 20 yards separated him from the cabin. Then he stopped. The warriors remained behind him. Silent. Waiting. Ayanna stepped beside Elias on the porch. Her shoulders were tense, but she did not retreat. The chief's eyes settled on her immediately. Relief flashed across his face. Only for a second. Then it vanished beneath years of discipline. My daughter, he said. His voice carried easily through the cold air. Ayanna met his gaze. Father. Neither moved. Neither smiled. The distance between them felt larger than the prairie itself. Finally, the chief turned his attention to Elias. His dark eyes studied the rancher carefully. Not with anger. Not with hatred. With evaluation. You sheltered her. It wasn't a question. Elias nodded once. She needed help. The chief remained silent. Snow drifted between them. Minutes seemed to stretch. Then the older man slowly dismounted. Several warriors shifted immediately, but he raised a hand. They settled at once. The chief approached alone. Every step appeared measured. Purposeful. When he finally stopped, he stood only a few feet from Elias. Close enough to see the lines age had carved into both their faces. Close enough to recognize grief. The chief looked at the bandage wrapped around Ayana's arm. Then back at Elias. You treated her wound. Someone had to. Another long silence followed. The chief glanced toward his daughter. You caused fear among your people. Ayana didn't lower her eyes. And they caused fear in me. Several warriors exchanged uneasy looks. The chief remained expressionless. You abandoned your responsibilities. I refused a life chosen for me. The tension in the air tightened. Elias could feel it. One wrong word might change everything. Yet neither father nor daughter backed down. Finally, the chief looked toward the distant mountains. When he spoke again, his voice carried something different. Weariness. I searched 3 weeks for you. Ayana's expression softened. Only slightly. For the first time, Elias saw not a chief and a runaway daughter. He saw a father terrified of losing his child. The realization changed everything. The chief turned back toward Elias. You saved her life. Again, not a question. Elias shrugged lightly. I did what anyone should do. The warriors behind the chief murmured among themselves. The older man, however, remained focused. For what felt like an eternity, he studied the rancher. Measuring him. Judging him. Searching for something. Finally he spoke. My people owe a debt. Elias blinked. That wasn't where he expected this conversation to go. The chief continued. But debt and family are different matters. The warmth disappeared from his voice. My daughter still belongs with her people. Ayana immediately stepped forward. No. The single word cut through the air. Every warrior became still. The chief's jaw tightened. Ayana. No. Her voice grew stronger. I am not a child. Snow swirled around them. The wind picked up. And for the first time, genuine conflict appeared in the chief's eyes. Not between himself and Elias. Between duty and love. He looked at his daughter for a long time. Then slowly turned away. When he faced Elias again, his expression had hardened. You gave her shelter. Elias nodded. The chief mounted his horse once more. But shelter does not change what comes next. Without another word, he raised his hand. The warriors immediately began turning their horses. Yet none rode away. Instead, they repositioned themselves beyond the ranch, forming camps across the surrounding hills. Watching. Waiting. Preparing. Elias frowned. What does that mean? The chief looked back over his shoulder. His answer carried across the frozen prairie. It means tomorrow, I return not only as a father. His gaze shifted briefly toward Ayana. But as a chief. The riders moved out. One by one. Dozens of horses disappearing into the snowy distance. Leaving Elias and Ayana standing alone on the porch. The ranch suddenly felt much smaller than before. And as darkness slowly began creeping across the prairie, both of them understood the same thing. The hardest part of this story had not yet begun. The hardest part of this story had not yet begun. That night, neither Elias nor Ayana slept much. The prairie beyond the cabin glowed faintly beneath moonlight, and scattered campfires burned across the distant hills where the warriors had settled. From the porch, Elias could see tiny points of orange light flickering against the darkness. A reminder. The problem hadn't gone away. It was simply waiting for morning. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled softly. Ayana sat near the hearth, repairing the stitching on her sleeve while Elias sharpened a pocket knife that didn't need sharpening. Both were searching for something to do with their thoughts. Finally, Ayana broke the silence. You should leave before sunrise. Elias looked up. My ranch isn't exactly portable. A faint smile touched her lips. I'm serious. So am I. Her expression turned solemn. My father respects you. That's good to know. But if the council stands with him tomorrow, respect may not matter. Elias set the knife aside. What exactly happens tomorrow? Ayana stared into the flames. He'll ask me to return. And if you refuse? She didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Then he must choose between his people and me. The room fell silent again. Elias understood impossible choices. Life had given him plenty. But no parent should ever face one like that. Outside, the wind rattled the cabin walls. Inside, neither of them spoke for a long time. Eventually, Ayana looked toward him. Why did you help me? The question surprised him. After a moment, he shrugged. You were hurt. Most men would have kept walking. Most men aren't as stubborn as me." She laughed softly. The sound felt strange in the cabin. Not unwelcome. Just unfamiliar. Then her expression softened. "No." She shook her head. "That's not the reason." Elias stared into the fire. The truth came easier than expected. "Because once upon a time, someone saved me." Ayanna waited. Years passed through his mind. His wife's smile. The life they built. The life they lost. "When my world fell apart," he continued quietly, "people gave me reasons to keep going. I didn't deserve it, but they did anyway." He looked toward her. Seemed wrong not to do the same. Ayanna lowered her eyes. Neither spoke again. Yet somehow the silence between them felt lighter than before. Morning arrived beneath heavy gray clouds. The moment Elias stepped outside, he knew the warriors had returned. They lined the ridge from one end to the other. More than before. Not threatening. Not aggressive. Simply present. The entire tribe seemed to be watching. Waiting. Ayanna joined him on the porch. Together they faced the approaching riders. At their center rode her father. The chief stopped several yards from the cabin. This time he wasn't alone. Several elders rode beside him. Men and women whose faces carried decades of wisdom. The atmosphere felt different. Less like a confrontation. More like a judgment. The chief dismounted first. His eyes immediately found his daughter. "Ayanna." She stepped forward. "Father." The elders exchanged quiet glances. One elderly woman finally spoke. "You have been given time to reconsider." Ayanna stood straight. "I have." "And?" The young woman drew a steady breath. Then answered clearly enough for everyone to hear. "I will not return." Murmurs spread through the gathered warriors. Not angry murmurs. Surprised ones. The elderly woman nodded slowly. "As we expected." The chief remained silent. His face revealed nothing. Another elder stepped forward. "Ayanna, your father fears losing you." She looked toward him. "I know. And you?" A long pause followed. Then her voice softened. "I fear losing him too." The confession changed everything. The tension that had gripped the gathering seemed to ease. Not disappear. But soften. Because suddenly the argument wasn't about rebellion. Or tradition. Or pride. It was about family. The chief finally spoke. "You believe your path lies elsewhere." "I do." "You believe freedom matters more than expectation." "Yes." The chief looked toward the mountains. Toward the endless horizon beyond them. When he spoke again, his voice carried years of wisdom. "When I was young, I told my father the same thing." Ayanna blinked. Several warriors exchanged surprised looks. Even the elders seemed amused. For the first time, a small smile appeared beneath the chief's stern expression. "My father hated hearing it." A ripple of laughter spread through the gathering. The tension broke completely. The chief stepped closer to his daughter. "I wanted to protect you." "I know. I still do." Ayanna's eyes glistened. "So let me choose." The old chief studied her for a long moment. Then something remarkable happened. He nodded. Not as a chief. As a father. A collective sigh seemed to pass through the crowd. The decision had been made. No battles. No threats. No ultimatums. Only acceptance. The chief reached into a leather pouch and removed a small carved pendant. It hung from a braided cord. Carefully, he placed it into Ayanna's hands. "Wherever you go," he said quietly, "you carry your people with you." Tears filled her eyes. She embraced him. For several seconds neither moved. The warriors respectfully looked away. Some moments belonged only to family. When they finally separated, the chief turned toward Elias. The rancher braced himself. The older man stepped forward. Then extended his hand. "You protected what mattered most to me." Elias accepted the handshake. The chief's grip was firm. Steady. "Take care of yourself," the chief said. "You too." A faint smile appeared. Then the chief mounted his horse. One by one, the warriors followed. Soon the long line of riders began moving across the prairie. Not as an army. Not as a threat. But as a people returning home. Ayanna watched until the last rider disappeared beyond the horizon. Only then did she release a slow breath. The prairie felt quiet again. Different. But peaceful. Elias stood beside her. What now? She looked toward the distant hills. Then toward the ranch. Finally, she smiled. A real smile. The first he'd seen. "Now," she said, We figure out tomorrow. Months later, spring returned to the prairie. Wildflowers bloomed beside the creek. The ranch felt alive again. Laughter occasionally drifted from the cabin. The rocking chair beside the fireplace no longer sat empty. And though life could never replace what had been lost, it had proven something Elias thought impossible. Sometimes the unexpected doesn't arrive to take something away. Sometimes it arrives to remind us that life still has chapters left to write. And on certain evenings, when the sun dipped low beyond the prairie and painted the sky gold, Elias would glance toward the distant horizon and remember the morning 70 warriors surrounded his home. Not as the day danger arrived, but as the day his life began again.